It was a day like any other, until it wasn't. He'd risen early, ready for another meeting that could change everything. Another deal that could bring him even closer to solidifying his legacy. But today, it wasn't just a meeting. It wasn't just a deal. Today, it was a moment that would test his patience, his character, and the world he thought he knew. A black CEO, powerful, influential, calm, collected, boarding a plane. He's already made his mark in the business world, respected by his peers and feared by his competitors. Nothing could prepare him for what happened next. Nothing in his life could have predicted what was about to unfold on that plane. As he made his way through the terminal, there was a sense of routine, a sense of control. Everything was in its place. Or so he thought. The gate was right ahead, the plane waiting for him to board. No delays, no interruptions. Just another step towards securing the future. But then, as he approached the door, something changed. A figure appeared, a security officer, and then another. No explanation, no warning, no reason. Just a firm voice asking him to step aside. Just a cold hand on his arm, guiding him away from the line. No one else was stopped. No one else was asked to leave. Just him. The CEO, never one to show weakness, didn't flinch. He didn't protest. He didn't even ask why. The air was thick with confusion, and he could feel the eyes on him, the murmurs behind him. But he kept his face neutral. It wasn't until he was asked to leave the plane that the first wave of disbelief hit him. Why? The question echoed in his mind as he was led away from the gate. No answers, no explanations, no apology, just the feeling that this was happening because of who he was, because of the color of his skin. Nothing else made sense. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't acting out. He wasn't causing any trouble. But there he was, being escorted off a plane like a criminal. He stepped back, holding on to the thin thread of composure that kept him grounded. It wasn't that he hadn't faced racism before. It was just the sheer audacity of it this time. The clear, calculated nature of it. It was bigger than just an airline mix-up. This wasn't a mistake. This was an act of intentional humiliation, an attempt to strip him of his dignity in front of everyone. He stood there on the tarmac, watching as the plane's door closed without him. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He wasn't even surprised. But he was clear-headed, calm, in control. He understood something then that would change everything. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. As he walked back to the terminal, the reality of what had just occurred began to sink in. He wasn't just a passenger in that moment. He wasn't just a man with a seat that had been taken away. He was something more, something bigger than what they thought, something they couldn't see, but soon would. The flight wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. This was bigger than the embarrassment, bigger than the humiliation. This was a message he was about to send to a system that had tried to break him before. But this time, he wasn't going to let them win. No one had expected him to stand up. No one thought he would push back. The assumption was that a man in his position, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, would just take it. Smile, nod, let it slide. They thought the same thing that had happened to so many others would happen to him. They thought wrong. He picked up his phone. His lawyer was on the other end before the first ring even finished. His voice steady, but the anger building under the surface. I need to make a call. We're going to make them pay. He wasn't just reacting to a personal slight. He wasn't just upset over a deal that was now in jeopardy. No, this was more. This was about standing up for every single black person who had been humiliated in the same way. It was about the bigger picture, the system of racial injustice that had been hiding in plain sight for far too long. The question wasn't how he was going to handle the fallout from this incident. The question was, how far was he willing to go to make sure this didn't happen to anyone else? As he walked out of the airport, a weight settled on him. It was a quiet, simmering anger, an anger that had been building for years, decades even. An anger that had remained buried under his professionalism, under his ability to smile and navigate the corporate world with ease. But now that anger was going to take shape. It was going to lead him down a path that no one could have predicted. This wasn't just about getting an apology from an airline. This wasn't about public humiliation. This was about showing the world that black men at the highest levels of success would no longer be silent, no longer afraid of losing it all for standing up for what was right. The system had tried to take something from him, and now he was going to take something from them. The plane was just the beginning. The deal was the real target, the one that had been months in the making, the one that had been built on sweat, trust, and years of hard work, the one that everyone thought was untouchable, the one they would lose because of what they did to him. He wasn't going to let it slide. No apologies would be accepted. No explanations would be enough. They had humiliated him. Now they would feel the weight of their mistake. In the coming days, the world would watch as this CEO turned the tables, as he used everything at his disposal to destroy their multi-million-dollar deal, one move at a time. And with every move, he would show the world what it meant to fight back. The time for patience was over. The time for silence was over. And soon, the world would know the true cost of underestimating a black man in power. His name was Marcus Williams, a man who'd worked his whole life to carve a path to success. He wasn't born into wealth, and he didn't inherit any of the privileges that so many take for granted. No, Marcus built his empire from the ground up. His company, a leader in the tech industry, was a testament to his hard work and ingenuity. But today, none of that mattered. Today, Marcus was just another black man in the eyes of those who saw only his skin color and nothing else. Marcus had boarded the flight to California with the same calm determination that had gotten him through countless other challenges in his life. He was on his way to meet with a potential partner, a deal that could expand his business into international markets. This deal was the culmination of years of effort, and securing it would solidify his place in the corporate world. But for all the preparation, all the planning, Marcus had no way of knowing that today would turn into the greatest test of his career. As he walked down the aisle of the plane, his thoughts were already on the presentation he would be giving in a few hours. The deal was critical. It could change the direction of his company forever. The flight was nothing more than a necessary step in the journey. He settled into his seat, buckling his seatbelt and pulling out his laptop to make final adjustments to his slides. Minutes later, as the plane began to taxi down the runway, Marcus felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see a flight attendant standing in the aisle, her expression strained, almost apologetic. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. "Could you please come with me?" Confusion flickered across Marcus' face. He didn't know what this could be about. He hadn't done anything wrong. Still, he stood up, nodding as he followed her toward the front of the plane. Before he could ask what was going on, two uniformed security officers stepped into view. Their eyes locked on him with the cold, calculating stare of someone who had already made up their mind about what was happening. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though he could feel the tension building in his chest. "Please step off the plane, sir," one of the officers ordered curtly. The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Step off the plane? This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not with everything he had riding on this deal. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" Marcus asked, still trying to make sense of the situation. The second officer, a woman this time, spoke, her voice laced with an unspoken authority. "We're asking you to leave the plane, sir. Now. But why?" Marcus pressed, his patience starting to wear thin. "What's going on here?" The woman looked him up and down, as if assessing him. "We don't need to explain ourselves," she replied. "Just get off the plane, please." Marcus stood there, his heart racing. He wasn't sure whether it was the indignity of the situation or the knowledge that this was far from normal that kept him rooted to the spot. But the reality began to sink in. The look on the officers' faces wasn't one of concern or confusion. It was one of certainty, like they were following orders without question. Orders he couldn't understand, but orders he was supposed to obey. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers on him, their silent judgment hanging heavy in the air. Some were whispering to each other, while others pretended not to notice. But Marcus felt it. He felt the weight of their gazes, the subtle shift in the atmosphere as the officers closed in on him. As he turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random mistake. This wasn't just an error in protocol. This was something more, something deeper, something calculated. He walked down the narrow aisle, every step heavy with the weight of this moment. Why me? He asked himself. Why now? The officers escorted him through the cabin, their steps matching his. He could feel the anger rising inside him, but he kept it in check. He knew that if he reacted, if he raised his voice or caused a scene, it would only prove their point. They were in control, and they had the power to make him disappear from that plane with no explanation, no recourse. The door to the plane opened, and as Marcus stepped onto the tarmac, a cold gust of wind hit him. He was outside, standing in the harsh daylight, watching as the door to the plane closed behind him. The reality of the situation hit him all at once. He was standing alone in a moment that would change his life forever. Alone on the tarmac, his dignity stripped from him. But Marcus didn't give up. He didn't break down. He stood there, seething, trying to calm his breathing to gather his thoughts. He wasn't just humiliated. He wasn't just being asked to leave a plane. This was a statement, a message that, despite his success, despite his hard work, despite everything he had built, he was still a black man in a world that would never truly let him forget it. This wasn't just a random encounter. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a statement they were making. And Marcus knew it. He knew what this was about. He had experienced it before. Subtle jabs, quiet insults, the undercurrent of racism that would rear its ugly head in moments like this. But this was different. This was a test. And he wasn't about to let them win. The flight was still delayed. The passengers were still sitting, unaware of the storm brewing outside their plane. And Marcus stood there, facing a decision that would change everything. His business, his reputation, his life, none of it seemed important anymore. All that mattered now was that feeling in his chest, that burning anger, that drive for justice. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know what he was capable of. As he stood on the tarmac, staring at the closed door of the plane, the wheels in his mind began to turn. He wasn't just going to let this slide. No, he would make them feel the consequences of their actions. He would make sure the world knew exactly what had happened. What happened next, no one could have predicted. Marcus had made a decision, and this was just the beginning. What he was about to do would destroy everything they thought they knew about him. He wasn't just a CEO. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a force to be reckoned with, and no one would be able to ignore him after today. This story is just beginning, and I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever been wrongly judged or treated unfairly? Drop a comment below and let us know. And don't forget to hit that like button if you believe in standing up for what's right. Subscribe to stay with us as we continue this journey. We're just getting started. Marcus Williams wasn't born into a world that expected greatness from him. No silver spoons, no red carpets. His path to success was anything but easy, and it wasn't always paved with opportunities. From the very beginning, the world had different expectations for Marcus. Not as a CEO, not as a leader, but as someone who would never rise above his station. They didn't see him for the man he was. They saw him for the color of his skin. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, Marcus learned early on what it meant to fight for every inch. His mother, a hardworking woman who raised him alone, always reminded him that success was earned, not given. Every day was a battle. Every day, the world around him told him he wasn't enough. But Marcus never believed it. Not for a second. His earliest memories were filled with moments that, to him, seemed like just another part of life. But later, he'd realize they were moments that shaped him. Moments that hardened his resolve. From the schoolyard to the basketball courts, he faced the kind of prejudice that would make others shrink away, but not Marcus. He stood tall. Even when the odds were stacked against him, he never let it define him. Flash forward to his teenage years, when things started to change. He excelled in school. He was sharp, focused, and determined to make something of himself. He got a scholarship to a prestigious college, one that was predominantly white. The first day he walked into that campus, the stares, the whispers, the subtle looks of suspicion, they were all too familiar. But he pushed through, keeping his eyes on the prize. His dream wasn't just to graduate. It was to make something of himself in a world that had already decided what he would be. Friend, Marcus was always different. He had this fire inside him. He wasn't like the other kids. It wasn't about being the smartest, though he was. It was about proving to the world that he belonged in spaces that didn't want him there. And I could see it, the way people treated him, the way they underestimated him. But Marcus, he never let it stop him. He just kept going, said his friend. His rise through college wasn't without its hurdles. He faced blatant racism in some of the classrooms, the hallways, and the very places where he should have felt welcomed. But instead of letting it break him, it only strengthened his resolve. When he graduated, he entered the workforce, not just as a man trying to make a living, but as a man determined to change the world that had always held him back. I remember the first time I saw Marcus. He walked into the room like he owned it. There was something about his presence. You could see he had the potential to be more than just another employee. But that potential, it was something that others weren't ready to recognize. We had some challenges in the beginning. He had to prove himself more than anyone else. He had to work twice as hard, fight twice as long, just to get the recognition that other people, frankly, took for granted, said his former boss. But Marcus wasn't discouraged. He didn't need their recognition. He had something they didn't: resilience. The corporate world was tough, and for someone like him, someone who didn't fit the typical mold, it was an even steeper climb. He faced microaggressions in every meeting. His ideas were dismissed, his opinions ignored. But Marcus knew that he had the skills, the knowledge, the passion, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that from him. It wasn't long before Marcus realized that if he wanted to be taken seriously, he would have to create his own space. And so he did. He started his own company, a small tech startup with big ideas. He poured every ounce of energy into it, working tirelessly to turn it into something that would not just survive, but thrive. I always knew Marcus was destined for greatness, but even I didn't realize how much it would cost him. We all knew that the world wasn't going to hand him anything, but seeing him build that company from nothing, that was something else. He had to fight every single day, not just for the business, but for the respect he deserved, said one of his family members. The early days of his company were grueling. He didn't have the luxury of being just another CEO. No, Marcus was forced to prove himself at every turn. He had to convince investors that his company was worth their money, that he was worth believing in. He had to battle the constant stereotypes, the looks of doubt, the underestimation. And slowly, piece by piece, he built something bigger than he'd ever imagined. But the journey was far from easy. There were constant challenges, both from the business world and from the people who would do anything to see him fail. Racism wasn't just a part of Marcus' personal life. It was woven into every aspect of his career. It wasn't just the overt acts of discrimination. It was the subtle, insidious ones, the questions about whether he was qualified enough, the doubts about his leadership, the assumptions about his abilities. Colleague. There was always this kind of undercurrent. People would say things like, "Oh, Marcus is good for a black guy." Or they'd question his credentials, even when he was the best person for the job. But what they didn't see was the grit he had, the hustle. He didn't just work harder than anyone else. He worked smarter. He made his way into spaces that weren't meant for him. And he didn't stop, ever. Over the years, Marcus' company grew. It went from being a small startup to a multi-million-dollar enterprise. It wasn't just about making money anymore. It was about making a difference. Marcus knew that his success wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who'd been told they couldn't make it. Everyone who'd been shut out of opportunities because of the color of their skin. By the time Marcus reached the height of his success, his company was no longer just a business. It was a beacon of hope. It was a symbol of perseverance in the face of adversity. But what most people didn't know was that it wasn't just Marcus' ambition that had brought him here. It was his heart, his belief that success could be used to uplift others, his understanding that the true measure of his success wasn't in the profits he made, but in the lives he impacted. What Marcus built wasn't just an empire. It was a movement that showed the world that people like him, black people, could achieve anything. And now, as the CEO of one of the most successful companies in the world, Marcus had become a symbol of defiance. A symbol that no matter how hard they tried to push him down, he would rise. And rise he did. But despite everything he'd achieved, there was one thing that still lingered in Marcus' heart. The question that he couldn't seem to shake. Why had they tried to ruin him? Why had they humiliated him on that flight? What had he done to deserve such treatment? Are you inspired by Marcus' journey? Let us know in the comments below. How do you deal with adversity in your life? Hit that like button if you believe in fighting against the odds. Don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter. This is just the beginning of Marcus' story, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The wheels of justice are often slow, but for Marcus, they were a constant presence in his mind. That moment, the one when security had dragged him off the plane like a criminal, was still fresh. The sting of humiliation burned in his chest, but it wasn't the only thing gnawing at him. He wasn't just angry. No, this was something deeper. This was about principle, about respect, and he wasn't going to let it slide. Not this time. After the incident, Marcus didn't sleep. He couldn't. His thoughts were in turmoil, circling around the events on that plane, replaying each second in his head like a broken record. He'd walked off that plane, yes, but in the silence of his thoughts, he wasn't sure if he had walked away with his dignity or if it had been taken from him. He knew what it felt like to be dehumanized, to be reduced to a stereotype. It wasn't the first time it had happened, but this time it felt different. This time, something inside him snapped. Marcus wasn't a man who made hasty decisions. He was methodical, strategic, always thinking ahead. But as the hours dragged on, the anger within him only grew. He didn't need to be told what had happened on that plane. He already knew. He had been profiled. They had targeted him for the simple reason that he was black, and they assumed he didn't belong. But Marcus wasn't just another black man. He was Marcus Williams, a force in the business world. And today, he was going to make sure they knew it. He picked up the phone, dialing his lawyer first. The phone rang several times before a voice on the other end finally picked up. "Lawyer, Marcus? What's going on? Are you okay?" Marcus' voice was calm, but beneath the surface, the fire still smoldered. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about what happened today. I don't want to just let this go. It's time to do something about it." The lawyer hesitated for a moment, sensing the weight of his words. He knew Marcus well enough to understand that when his mind was made up, nothing could change it. "Lawyer, what are you thinking?" "Marcus, I'm thinking I'm done playing by their rules. I'm thinking I don't care if this deal is worth millions. I care more about showing them that what they did to me wasn't okay, and I'm going to make them pay for it." The lawyer stayed silent, weighing his words. He knew what Marcus was about to do wasn't going to be easy, but Marcus had never been one to shy away from difficult decisions. And this decision, it was one that could change everything. "Lawyer, you're talking about pulling out of the deal? You realize what this could do to your company, right?" "Marcus, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm not going to let them get away with it. And I'm not going to stand by while they try to silence me. If they want to see how serious I am, then let's see how serious they are about doing business with someone they've just humiliated." It was in that moment that Marcus made his decision. There would be no going back. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every black person who had ever been wrongly judged, who had ever been underestimated. He was making a statement, not just in the business world, but in the fight for justice. But that decision, as powerful as it was, would have consequences. But it wasn't just the lawyer who was caught off guard. Marcus needed to talk to his business partner, someone who had been with him through thick and thin. A person who, while a valuable ally, didn't always share his unflinching resolve when it came to standing up against injustice. "Business partner, Marcus, man, I get it. I really do. But pulling out of this deal? That's huge. We're talking about millions of dollars here. Are you sure you want to make that kind of statement? You're risking everything." Marcus listened to his partner, but he wasn't moved. He had been here before, people telling him to stay quiet, to play it safe. They wanted him to brush it off, to look the other way. But that wasn't Marcus. Not anymore. "Marcus, do you think they'd give me the same advice if I were anyone else? If I wasn't black? I'm done apologizing for who I am, and I'm done letting people treat me like I don't belong. If this deal means that much to them, they'll have to come to terms with the fact that they'll have to do business with someone who demands respect." His words were firm, and the decision was final. But still, the weight of it pressed down on him. This wasn't just a decision about a business deal. It was a decision about his place in a world that had always tried to diminish him. The day passed slowly, and Marcus spent the night in his office, surrounded by stacks of paperwork. He wasn't just planning his next move, he was strategizing. Every step had to be perfect. He wasn't just going to walk away from the deal. He was going to make sure they knew why. And he was going to make sure they felt the consequences. It wasn't long before word got out. Marcus had officially pulled his company out of the multi-million-dollar deal. The investors were stunned. The executives were confused. But Marcus didn't care about their confusion. He cared about sending a message. He cared about standing tall in the face of adversity, no matter the cost. Close colleague. We knew this was coming. We knew Marcus wasn't going to back down. But even I didn't expect him to pull out of the deal. The thing about Marcus is that he's not just doing this for himself. He's doing this for everyone who's ever been made to feel less than. And I think that's what makes him so powerful. And just like that, the decision was made. But the consequences were swift. The company that had once been eager to close the deal with Marcus found themselves scrambling. The ripple effects were immediate. The stocks dropped. Potential clients started backing away, and whispers began to circulate through the business world. What had Marcus just done? And why? But Marcus wasn't worried about the money. He had more than enough to sustain his business. What he was worried about was the message it sent. And when he looked at the faces of the people in his company, the people who had stood by him through thick and thin, he knew he had done the right thing. They didn't just believe in his vision, they believed in him. And that's all that mattered. But even as the repercussions of his decision started to unfold, Marcus knew something that the rest of the world didn't. This wasn't over. What had happened to him on that plane wasn't just a personal affront. It was a symptom of a larger, systemic issue. And Marcus was about to show the world that when you stand up to injustice, the consequences don't just stay within the boardroom. They ripple out, affecting everything. What would you have done if you were in Marcus' shoes? Do you think he made the right call? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. The journey's just beginning, and you won't want to miss how this all unfolds. The deal was supposed to be a win, a huge win. A deal that would solidify their position as the industry leader, catapulting them into a new era of corporate dominance. But it wasn't the deal that had been lost. No, it was something far more significant. Their dignity, their respect, and their future. The news broke quickly. In an unexpected and bold move, Marcus Williams had pulled his company out of the multi-million-dollar deal that had been the talk of the business world for months. What began as a high-profile partnership with promises of prosperity for both sides had crumbled in a matter of hours. Marcus' reasons for walking away were clear to those who knew him. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the deal. It was about justice. It was about standing up for himself and for everyone who had ever been treated as less than. The executives at the company that had been courting Marcus were left in shock. In the quiet hum of their conference rooms, phone calls were made, and frantic emails pinged back and forth as they scrambled to figure out how to salvage the situation. But the damage had already been done. What they hadn't realized in their rush to secure the deal was the caliber of the man they were dealing with. Marcus wasn't just another businessman. He was a force, a man who, when crossed, had the power to destroy everything they had worked for. And now, it was too late to change course. Headline: Major deal falls through after CEO pulls out over racial profiling incident. Headline: Corporate giant faces backlash as public outrage grows. Interview clip with media analyst. This is one of those moments that will be remembered for years to come. The fallout from this decision goes far beyond just the loss of millions of dollars. It's about public perception, and the company has just made a colossal misstep. This isn't just a deal lost. This is about credibility lost. The ripple effects were immediate. Their stock prices plummeted as investors, fearful of the company's tarnished reputation, began pulling out. The value of the company's shares dropped by a staggering 15% in the first 24 hours following Marcus' decision. The executives, who had once believed that their position in the industry was unassailable, were now fighting to keep their place at the top. And they couldn't understand why the deal had fallen apart. It wasn't just the money that hurt, it was the message it sent. It wasn't just the money, it was something far more insidious. They hadn't just lost a deal. They had lost a man who could have been their greatest ally. A man who wasn't just business savvy, but who carried with him the weight of countless stories of racism, injustice, and inequality. A man who, in that moment, had chosen to speak for everyone who had ever been wronged in this very system. The tension in the executive offices was palpable. Senior executives, who had once been so confident in their negotiations with Marcus, were now pointing fingers at each other. The blame game began. Everyone wanted to know who had made the mistake, who had pushed too hard, who had misread Marcus' resolve. Executive 1. How do we let this happen? We knew how important this deal was. How do we not see this coming? Executive 2. We've lost the deal, and now we're facing a PR disaster. The optics on this are all wrong. They'll paint us as the bad guys, and we'll lose all credibility. The problem wasn't just their public relations team scrambling to salvage their image. It was the deep-rooted issue they had ignored for so long, systemic racial injustice. And in their desperation, they still couldn't see it. Behind the closed doors of the corporate boardroom, the executives try to manage the damage. The air is thick with tension as they make plans to issue a public apology and reframe the narrative, but it's too late. The damage to their reputation is irreversible. The truth was, no apology would fix what had been broken. No amount of money could make up for the fact that they had humiliated a man simply because of the color of his skin. They had profiled him, and now they were paying the price. But the company's greatest failure wasn't just their inability to foresee the consequences of their actions. No, it was their failure to recognize the humanity of the man they had wronged. And now, the world was watching. News anchor. The fallout from this failed deal is just beginning to be understood. Many are questioning whether the company will be able to recover from this hit to its reputation. But what's more concerning is the broader message it sends about racial profiling in corporate America. Is this the world we still live in? In the following days, protests broke out outside the company's headquarters. Activists, inspired by Marcus' stand, came together in solidarity to demand justice. They weren't just fighting for Marcus. They were fighting for everyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, and wrongfully judged based on their race. The company's executives scrambled to recover, but nothing they did could quell the public outcry. Every apology they issued seemed disingenuous. Every attempt to redeem themselves came too late. The damage was done, and the world knew what had happened. They had crossed the wrong man, and now they were paying the price. Lawyer, the decision Marcus made wasn't just a personal one. It was a statement to the world. And while the financial repercussions are severe, the greater impact is the message it sends. No longer will people of color be silent in the face of injustice. No longer will we let corporations get away with dehumanizing us. The world is watching, and things are changing. And while Marcus' business empire was strong enough to weather the storm, the company he had once been so close to doing business with, they were just beginning to understand the full scope of their error. Their loss was not just monetary. It was their integrity, their reputation, their place in the industry. And while they could attempt to rebuild, they would never forget the lesson Marcus had taught them. There is power in standing up against racial injustice. There is power in knowing who you are and refusing to be silenced. What do you think about the fallout from this decision? Do you think the company's apology was too little, too late? Let us know in the comments below. How do you think the industry can change to prevent these kinds of injustices? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates on Marcus' journey. Trust us, this story is far from over. They didn't just challenge him at the airport. They challenged his very existence. What happened to him wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a much bigger, much older story. A story written in pain, struggle, and the relentless battle against injustice. As the media frenzy surrounding the fallout from the deal continued to rage, Marcus Williams was left to grapple with the personal toll of the public racial profiling he had endured. He had stood up for what was right, but now he was left with the emotional weight of that decision. There was no handbook for dealing with something like this. No manual that told you how to face the world when it treated you like you didn't belong. It wasn't just the humiliation in front of a group of strangers at the airport. It wasn't just the stares, the questions, the accusations. It was the realization that for all his success, for all the hard work, for all the years of sacrifice, he was still seen as less than, As the footage of the airport encounter continued to circulate, Marcus found himself more and more reflective. The anger, the disbelief, the sting of injustice wasn't new to him. But this time it was different. This time, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about confronting a system that was built to keep people like him from rising to the top. It was about looking at the face of racism in the workplace and in public spaces, acknowledging the toll it took on his spirit, and asking, how do I move forward? Marcus Williams, I've always known racism exists. Hell, I've experienced it in ways I can't even begin to explain. But when it happens in front of thousands of people, that's when it hits different. You realize it's not just your battle anymore. It's everyone who's been overlooked, underappreciated, or silenced. And it's exhausting, but it's also necessary. If we don't confront it, we can't change it. For Marcus, it wasn't just about his own humiliation. It was about the weight of history, the systemic racism that had been a part of this country for centuries. The painful reality that, for many people of color, no amount of success, no amount of hard work, no amount of achievements would ever shield them from being treated as less than. What happened to Marcus in that airport wasn't just about one individual. It was part of a painful and unbroken history. A history where Black people in America have been repeatedly subjected to discrimination, violence, and exclusion. From Rosa Parks' quiet resistance on that bus to the cries of justice following George Floyd's death, the story is the same. The fight for basic human dignity has always been met with resistance. Civil rights expert, racial profiling, discrimination in the workplace, the constant feeling of being surveilled in public spaces. These are not isolated incidents. These are symptoms of a much larger systemic problem. And until we recognize this, until we change the systems that perpetuate these actions, we will continue to see people like Marcus endure these same struggles. This isn't just an individual problem. This is a collective problem. But Marcus wasn't going to let himself be defined by this moment. As painful as it was, it fueled him to take action, not just for himself, but for all those who had suffered the same indignity. He knew this wasn't just about his personal experience. This was about the collective fight for justice. As the public reacted to the viral video of his ordeal, many saw it as a catalyst. People took to social media, posting their own stories of racial profiling and discrimination, some from public spaces, some from the workplace, some from everyday life. It was as if a floodgate had been opened. Marcus' decision to walk away from the deal had become a symbol, not just of his personal defiance, but of a larger call to action. The conversations shifted. No longer was it just about the contract or the failed negotiation. It was about changing the system that allowed such behavior to persist. In a dimly lit room, Marcus stands in front of a mirror, staring at his reflection. The weight of what he's about to do is heavy, but there's no turning back now. He adjusts his tie, runs a hand over his face, and exhales deeply. He's ready, not just to speak for himself, but to speak for everyone who has ever been treated this way. That day, Marcus stepped into the public eye once more. But this time, he wasn't just defending his actions. He was calling for something greater, something bigger than himself. He was calling for justice, for accountability, for a future where no one would have to go through what he had. The room is packed. Cameras flash. Reporters are ready with their questions. But Marcus stands tall, calm yet powerful, his voice unwavering. Marcus Williams, what happened to me was wrong. And yes, I could have let it slide. I could have ignored it and moved on. But I realized that every time we let these things slide, we give permission for the next person to be mistreated. I built my business, my empire, on values of integrity and respect. But more than that, I believe in the power of change. And this is just the beginning. We need to change the way we think about race in this country. We need to stop accepting the status quo. Stop accepting the idea that certain people are less than because of the color of their skin. This isn't just my fight. It's all of ours. The room was silent. The reporters, the camera crews, the public, all of them listening, hanging on every word. This wasn't just a CEO speaking about a failed business deal. This was a man speaking about his very humanity, his right to exist without fear of being judged or profiled because of his race. The press conference went viral. Clips were shared across social media, sparking conversations all over the world. People from every corner of the globe stood in solidarity with Marcus, sharing their own stories and expressing their outrage. Hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #InRacial Profiling began trending. The story that had started with a humiliating experience at an airport had turned into a movement, a call for systemic change that could no longer be ignored. What Marcus had done was more than just stand up for himself. He had given voice to the voiceless. He had shown a light on the ugly truth that many were too afraid to confront. The emotional toll of systemic racism wasn't just on the individual, it was on society as a whole. Psychologists, the emotional toll of racial profiling can be devastating. It's not just the immediate humiliation, it's the long-term effects on mental health, on self-esteem, on the way individuals perceive their place in the world. When you're constantly reminded that you're not seen as equal, it chips away at your soul. That's the toll of systemic racism. And that's what we need to address if we're ever going to move forward. For Marcus, this wasn't just about being profiled. It was about being seen. It was about being human. And it was about making sure that the world saw him, not as a threat, not as an outsider, but as someone worthy of dignity, respect, and equality. What do you think about Marcus' decision to speak out? Do you think his actions will inspire others to stand up against racial profiling? Let us know in the comments below. Share your own experiences with racial injustice and what you think needs to change in our society. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more on this incredible journey. Was it an act of revenge? Or was it a stand for justice? Was Marcus truly fighting for a cause larger than himself? Or was he merely seeking retribution for a personal insult? As the dust settled from the fallout, he began to question his own motivations. The line between right and wrong, justice and vengeance, had blurred in his mind. And now, it was time to confront the deeper moral questions. After his public call for justice, Marcus found himself immersed in a battle not only with the corporate world, but with his own conscience. The pressure of the decisions he had made began to weigh heavily on him. He had been hailed as a hero, admired for standing up to a system that had wronged him. But even as he received praise from all corners, a nagging feeling lingered in the back of his mind. Had he done the right thing? Was his decision to pull the deal about justice? Or was it driven by something more personal? Marcus sat alone in his office late at night, the city lights outside casting long shadows across his desk. The silence was deafening. His phone sat untouched, a constant reminder of the calls he hadn't answered. He had put everything on the line, his business, his reputation, his peace of mind, because he felt it was the right thing to do. But as the days went by, the self-doubt crept in. Was he seeking justice, or had he simply acted out of anger and frustration? In that moment of stillness, Marcus wasn't just facing the aftermath of the deal he had walked away from. He was facing the darker side of his own soul, the part of him that wanted to hurt those who had hurt him, the part that wanted revenge more than justice. It was the side of him he wasn't proud of, the side he had tried to bury for years. Marcus Williams, there's a part of me that wonders if what I did was the right thing. I thought I was making a stand for something bigger, but in the quiet moments, I can't help but question my own motivations. Was I fighting for justice, or was I just angry? Sometimes, the line between the two is thin, and it's hard to know which side of it you're on. As he pondered the consequences of his actions, Marcus knew he couldn't carry the weight of this alone. He reached out to someone he had always trusted, an elder statesman in the civil rights movement, someone whose words had shaped his understanding of justice for years. The call was made. It was time for advice. It was time to understand if what he had done was truly about justice or just a natural human response to being wronged. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, measured, and full of wisdom. It had the kind of warmth that immediately put Marcus at ease, but it also carried the weight of years of fighting for racial justice in this country. Civil rights leader, Marcus, you've got to understand something. Justice isn't about being fair in the moment. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. And yes, There are times when it feels like we're fighting for a personal cause. But in the larger context, that's what justice often looks like. It's not about who wins in the short term. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what you did. The conversation was a revelation. Marcus realized that the journey for justice was not just about the righteous path. It was also about the messiness, the contradictions, and the complexity of human emotion. His decision to act, despite its personal toll, was rooted in the desire to right a wrong. That desire, however flawed in its execution, was an extension of the broader fight for equality. Legal expert. In the corporate world, retaliation can often look like justice, but it's not. What Marcus did, walking away from the deal, was an act of personal conviction. The consequences were real, but it wasn't about punishing the company. It was about making a statement that enough is enough. But we have to be careful. Justice is about systemic change. It's about creating a world where these moments of racial profiling don't happen in the first place. And that's a much bigger fight. The expert's words resonated with Marcus. He had been fighting against something much larger than the immediate incident. It was a battle for change. But in the process, he had to ask himself, was his decision about personal justice, or was it about something deeper, something that could move the needle for everyone who had been wronged? At home, Marcus tried to put on a brave face. He sat down to dinner with his wife and children, but the tension was palpable. His wife, Mia, could sense something was off. She had seen the toll this entire ordeal had taken on him, both emotionally and physically. As they sat across from one another at the dinner table, Mia couldn't help but ask the question that had been on her mind. Mia Williams, Marcus, I can see the weight of all of this on you. What's really going on? I know you've been through a lot, but this is eating you up inside. What are you feeling? Marcus paused, looking at his wife with a mixture of exhaustion and frustration. He loved her for her ability to see through his exterior, for understanding him in ways no one else could. And in that moment, he knew he had to be honest. Marcus Williams, I'm questioning everything. Did I do the right thing? Was I standing up for justice? Or was I just retaliating? I'm angry, Mia. Angry about the whole damn system. But I wonder if I'm making it worse. If I'm making it all about me rather than about the bigger fight. I don't know if I can keep going down this road. I'm tired. Mia Williams, Marcus, you've been fighting this battle your whole life. What you did wasn't just for you. It was for all of us. I know it's hard, but don't let your anger cloud the good you've done. You've made a statement, and that statement is bigger than anything you or they could have imagined. Mia's words were a comfort, but they didn't fully ease the pain Marcus felt. The uncertainty, the self-doubt, the fear of what he had just unleashed wasn't something that could be resolved overnight. But one thing was clear, he wasn't in this alone. The following day, Marcus went for a long walk through the city, taking in the crisp air and the quiet moments of solitude. As he walked, he thought about the conversations he had had, the civil rights leaders, the legal experts, his family. He thought about the legacy of the Black community in America, the resilience, the struggle, the perseverance. And in that moment, he realized something profound. Justice was not about being perfect. It was about taking action, even when you weren't sure of the outcome. It was about standing up, even when the world tried to push you down. Justice, he realized, wasn't always clean. It wasn't always fair. It didn't always feel right in the moment. But it was necessary, because if people didn't make a stand, nothing would ever change. And Marcus knew that the fight for racial equality was far from over. His actions might have been messy, might have been filled with doubt and fear, but they were his, and they mattered. What do you think? Was Marcus' decision an act of justice or revenge? How do we know when we're standing up for justice and when we're acting out of personal frustration? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more updates as we continue to dive deeper into Marcus' journey. In the wake of the storm, Marcus found that the true power of his decision wasn't in the loss of a deal. It was in the doors it opened for others. What had begun as a personal battle, one that had torn at him emotionally and mentally, now evolved into something much greater, a fight for systemic change. This wasn't just about his moment of anger or frustration. It was about building a future where marginalized voices could thrive in spaces that had long been closed to them. After the tumultuous fallout from his decision, Marcus knew that the most powerful response to injustice wasn't just through retaliation, it was through transformation. The narrative of his journey had shifted. What had begun as a personal reckoning, a stand against racial profiling and discrimination, now had a broader, more profound goal: to empower others. The loss of a multi-million-dollar deal, once seen as a devastating blow, had morphed into the catalyst for something bigger than himself. Weeks after the press conference, Marcus was seen at his desk, tirelessly working on the creation of new initiatives designed to support Black entrepreneurs. He was no longer focused on the corporate battle that had dominated his life. Instead, he had turned his attention to the future. His focus had broadened. He saw that systemic racism in the corporate world wasn't just about individual actions. It was about access, opportunity, and visibility. What happened to him wasn't just a setback. It was a springboard, a chance to reshape the very systems that had oppressed people like him for years. His experiences, painful as they had been, had provided him with the resolve to create lasting change. It was in those moments, with young entrepreneurs listening intently to his words, that Marcus realized the true significance of his decision. What had started as an attempt to defend his personal integrity had now blossomed into a movement to create a space where people of color could not only survive but thrive. Marcus made it clear to his team that the programs he was spearheading weren't just about charity. They were about building power within marginalized communities. These initiatives were designed to challenge the status quo, providing Black entrepreneurs with the resources, connections, and mentorship they needed to succeed in industries that had been historically unwelcoming. He also made a significant investment in local startups, funding ideas and businesses that had been overlooked or undervalued. He established a scholarship program for young Black professionals who wanted to enter corporate leadership roles but had been denied opportunities based on their race or socioeconomic status. These initiatives were more than just business ventures. They were part of his larger vision for equity and access in the corporate world. In every project, in every investment, Marcus could see the faces of the young people whose lives would be changed because of the doors he had opened. It wasn't just about money or business. It was about providing people with the agency to transform their own destinies. Marcus Williams, when I walked away from that deal, I didn't know what the outcome would be. But now, looking back, I realized that the greatest victory was never in the deal I lost. It was in the opportunities one created. It was about opening up the world for others so they could have the chances I never had. This wasn't just about creating a feel-good initiative. Marcus had experienced firsthand the damaging effects of a corporate environment that valued profit over people. He understood that what was needed was not just dialogue, but action. Real, tangible change. As Marcus continued to push for social justice within corporate spaces, the company that had once wronged him reached out. It was a moment Marcus had not anticipated. The same executives who had ignored his humanity now found themselves publicly acknowledging their mistake. They sought out Marcus, recognizing his leadership and his unyielding commitment to change. They proposed a partnership, one that would be focused on restructuring their internal policies to be more inclusive and racially conscious. The partnership would also support the initiatives Marcus had already set in motion. It was a groundbreaking moment. The company, once the symbol of systemic racial inequality in Marcus's life, was now partnering with him to build a more equitable future. It was an unexpected twist, but it was also a testament to the power of resilience. Marcus hadn't been fighting for personal gain. He had been fighting for something much larger. And in the end, even those who had wronged him saw the value in what he had created. In a press conference, Marcus stood side by side with the executives of the company. The moment was surreal, a complete turnaround from where he had been only months earlier. Together, they announced a new joint venture aimed at promoting diversity and inclusion within the corporate world. The company publicly acknowledged their past mistakes, pledging to implement changes that would ensure they no longer contributed to the systems of racial injustice that had so deeply impacted people of color. It was a significant step, one that marked a turning point not just for the company, but for the corporate world at large. For Marcus, this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about forcing change. And it wasn't about just winning a battle. It was about winning the war. By holding those in power accountable, he had set a new standard for what corporate responsibility could look like. As the news of Marcus's initiative spread, communities that had long been ignored began to take notice. Marcus received messages of thanks from countless individuals, entrepreneurs, professionals, and activists who were now empowered by the programs he had created. Young Black professionals were attending his mentorship programs, gaining access to networks and opportunities they had previously been denied. Black entrepreneurs were finally getting the investment and support they needed to grow their businesses. What had started as a personal crusade for justice had now blossomed into a movement to empower those who had been denied their rightful place in the corporate world. And Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. The company that had once been at the center of the storm now publicly acknowledged its role in perpetuating a system of racial inequality. It wasn't just an apology, it was an active, public commitment to change. They didn't just want to be seen as doing the right thing. They wanted to be held accountable. Their collaboration with Marcus was part of a larger strategy to overhaul their practices, ensuring that they would no longer contribute to the cycle of racial injustice. In the end, Marcus had achieved something far beyond what he had ever imagined. He had turned trauma into empowerment. He had taken a moment of personal injustice and used it to create systemic change. The fight wasn't over, but the first steps had been taken. And for Marcus, that was victory. Now, Marcus's journey doesn't end here, and neither does yours. Social justice is an ongoing fight. It's a daily effort, whether it's standing up for the rights of marginalized groups in your workplace, voting for policies that promote equality, or supporting businesses that are committed to doing the right thing. You have a role to play. What are you going to do to make a difference? How will you contribute to creating a more inclusive and just world? Comment below, share this video, and don't forget to like and subscribe. In the end, Marcus's story is just one of many. There are countless others out there, ordinary people doing extraordinary things to challenge the status quo. Now, it's your turn. Get involved. Advocate for equality in your own life. Support companies led by marginalized groups, and always stand up against injustice wherever you see it. The screen fades to a simple text overlay. Change begins with you. Stand for justice. Demand equality. The credits roll, but before they end, a final message appears. This is just the beginning. Let's build a future where no one is left behind. What steps will you take to make a difference in your own life and community? Share your thoughts. Subscribe for more stories of change. And don't forget to be the change you want to see in the world.